So, everybody knows that bleed is overpowered in Elden Ring. But what happens if you spice it up and make yourself be able to proc bleed consistently from a distance, while at the same time having all the mobility and utility to break your opponents completely? This is what the Punisher is specialized in. The Punisher is one of the few that is actually specialized in using whips. But not only whips that can proc bleed, the Punisher knows everything about all the different types of whips. Now, whips are not an easy weapon class to get proficient in at all, and therefore not many people dare to use them, let alone make them their preferred choice of weapon for combat. But after years and years of training and engaging in the Punisher's favorite hobby, BDSM, the Punisher has become the ultimate whips warrior. Whips as a weapon class get a huge power spike somewhere in the mid to late game, and most of this video will be centered around that power spike and the corresponding build. However, in the early game you can also make a pretty OP whips build for if you want to do a whips only playthrough. So let's get first into the early game whips build. But before we continue, I want to give a shout out to today's sponsor, EF Defense. EF Defense is a relatively new tower defense type of game, but after playing it myself it is quite fun and has great potential to become a hit in the future. You can use quite a vast number of different types of heroes to defend your base, and it has a lot of variety because all heroes have unique abilities and powers. Not only that, but there are also a lot of different types of enemies that you will face, giving the game plenty of depth. The strategy involved in the game goes quite deep, as well as you can expand on your battlefields and defend your base from various layers and protect your forces with special skills that synergize well with the heroes you deployed. EF Defense was also recently updated, and the update added an epic new hero that goes by the name of Devil Spear. And next to that, new content was added as well. The Forge and custom equipment are now in the game. With the Forge you can produce the materials used to produce custom equipment, and custom equipment is a new feature that will allow you to make all the equipment you want for your heroes. The best thing out of all is that EF Defense is very easy to download and is completely free, so you can check it out for yourself to see if you like it. You can download the game by using the QR code that is popping up right now on the screen or the link in the description. Whips are quite limited in options, especially early on. You don't have a lot of options for Ashes of Wars, they cost a lot of stamina to use, and early game you only really have two options for the whips that you can use. These are the Urumi and the whip with the bland name, which is the same name as the weapon class itself. You can pick up the Urumi in Caria Manor, while the normal whip can be found in Castle Morn in the Weeping Peninsula south of Limgrave right here. Now, for an early game build you definitely want to pick up both and start power stancing with them, and make sure to use the Urumi in your main hand. Doing so will actually net you a pretty OP build already, as power stancing whips gives you quite a lot of power early on, and whips' main selling point is that they have a nice range to them and moveset that you can make good use of to destroy your opponents. And when you use two of them at the same time, that is where the true power of a whips build will lie. In addition, the Urumi has a unique charged attack that gives you a lot of reach, and this is the only whip that actually has this type of attack, which is why you also want to put it in your main hand with this setup, so you can always make use of this charged attack, for you want to get that poke in and safely destroy your enemies. Now, like I said, the Ashes of Wars for your whips are very limited, but thankfully there are two very strong Ashes of Wars that you can get early game and put them on your whips. And these are the Hoarfrost Stomp and the Flames of the Redmanes. I would put the Hoarfrost Stomp on the Urumi and the Flames of the Redmanes on the normal whip. Hoarfrost Stomp is the only Ash of War in the game that can actually make your Urumi a cold Urumi without needing a wet blade. And this is very nice because we do want to make our Urumi cold infused for the early game, as it gives us the opportunity to proc Frostbite on your enemies and just completely destroy them like that. Next to that, the cold infusion is known to be especially good for the early game, as you don't really need an investment in intelligence to do great damage and you can just mostly focus on dexterity. which is nice because the Urumi scales insanely hard with dexterity. And this is also exactly the reason we want to infuse our other whip with the keen affinity while running the flames of the red mains Ashrafor on that whip. To do this, make sure to obtain the iron red plate in Limgrave and then just choose the keen affinity when you put flames of the red mains Ashrafor on your whip. Now with Hoarfrost Stomp on your Urumi, you can use its nice reach and AoE damage to do great damage to your opponents while building up frostbite. But most importantly, our Urumi will now have its damage split into magic and physical damage while being able to apply frostbite build-up on your enemies and thus proc frostbite. This makes this entire setup and combination very lethal early on. And with flames of the red mains on our other whip, we can stance break every boss very easily in Elden Ring. Flames of the red mains is probably one of the best Ashes of Wars in Elden Ring in a general sense, and it's an Ash of War that you can get at the start of the game. And thankfully it is compatible with a whip. So put that on the offhand whip for easy stance break to then follow up with 3 power stance hits or jump attacks with both of your whips, which is a really nice combo and you can get quickly a lot of damage in reliably. You can also remove the frostbite application on your enemies from the Urumi with the flames of the red mains to then just keep proccing frostbite infinitely on your enemies with your Urumi's charged attacks or while power stancing attacks. If you want to truly get OP early and use my methods of getting your whips to plus 16 and plus 15, check out the links in the description, as that is very easily possible as I've showed in other videos of mine. I'll also put links in the description on how to get the Ashes of Wars that I just showed you and went over, so definitely check that out if you have no idea how to get them early on. This early game setup is a really nice setup, and even though whips are very limited in both the number of whips in the game, especially early on, as well as the options for Ashes of Wars you get, in Elden Ring anything is possible if you just set your mind to it. And as you see, you can make a really good early game build like this, even for one of Elden Ring's most unpopular classes. But really, this is just the beginning, because your options for whips get much stronger as you progress through the game and meet certain people. Now, before you continue, make sure to give the video a like and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so yet, because I know where you live, so hit those buttons right now. Now, the reason for the power spike that whips have in Elden Ring is because you can get the Hoslow's Petal whip in the mid to late game parts of the game, and not only are you able to get one of these, you can actually get 2 of them in a single playthrough, even though they are quest related items. So you don't need to trade or go to NG Plus to get a second one or anything like that. You can get both of them by just playing the game. You'll get one from doing the questline related to Dialos, and you'll get the other one from doing the Volcano Manor questline that revolves around you going around the map to assassinate invader NPCs. The last contract in this questline will send you to kill Juno Hoslow, which is Dialos' brother in the lore, and after killing him you will get another Hoslow's Petal whip. If you want to get one of these Hoslow's Petal whips very early on, you can also alternatively just kill Dialos, but it will in return make you miss out on his entire questline, so that is a choice for you to make. After doing whatever route you prefer to do, you'll have 2 Hoslow's Petal whips, and that's exactly what we want. We want this whip in particular because it has one of the highest physical damages out of all the whips in the game, but at the same time it also has innate bloodlust buildup, which is unfortunately not available on the Urumi. The other whip in the game that has innate bloodlust buildup is the Thorned Whip, but in both physical damage as well as bloodlust buildup, Hoslow's Petal whips outshines and outdamages the Thorned Whip. And thanks to Hoslow's Petal whip innate bloodlust buildup, we can give it the occult affinity as well, and this is the ultimate affinity for any bleed build, because we can now scale both its actual damage as well as its bloodlust buildup through the same stat, Arcane, giving us the most optimal way to build a bleed build. And if you want to know more about why the occult affinity is so good for bleed builds and all the details that come with that, then make sure to also check my bleed centric video as I go over all of that. Now, with all that in mind, running 2 Hoslow's Petal whips at the same time through the proper setup that I will show you in this video will give you the ultimate whips build. 2 Hoslow's Petal whips is just too good. And before we get into the combat itself and showing you the whips in action, let's go over the stats and the setup of this build. Now for talismans and armor, you want to run the staples for a bleed build. These include the White Mask and the Lord of Blood's Exaltation Talisman. Both of these will increase your attack power every time you proc bleed on your enemies, and since you will be doing that a lot with this build, these two items will pretty much always be active. Then for the chest, you want to run the Raptor's Black Feather and Claw Talisman to get a bonus to our jump attack damage output. As you already saw in the early game whips build, whips have a great jump attack, and we definitely want to keep making use of the whips jump attacks in every part of the game essentially, and these two items give a nice damage bonus for that. Then for the third talisman, Millicent's Prosthesis is very nice because it gives 5 dexterity for free to help out with getting that 20 dexterity requirement for the Hoslow's Petal whips to be able to properly wield and use them, and it gives us a boost for our attack power when landing consecutive hits. And since we're running a power stancing build and basically attacking with 2 weapons at the same time, it's very easy to get a lot of attacks in quickly to get the full bonus to apply for our damage output. Now regarding the fourth talisman slot, it is flexible, but I like running the Dragon Crest Great Shield talisman as it makes us very tanky with this setup, which is very nice, and our other 3 talismans are all offensive, so putting this into the mix is a nice addition. For the other 2 gear pieces you can run really whatever you want, but I would recommend to get the most defensive stats possible while staying in the medium load category, and this can be achieved by using both pieces of the Bull Goat set for example. For aesthetics however, the Royal Knight Greaves are also a nice alternative option for leg armor, as they provide quite good defenses, but at the same time they actually also match the looks of the Hoslow's Petal whips very well. For the Flask of Wondrous Physic, the Green Burst Crystal tier is very nice, as whips do consume a lot of stamina while in combat, and having that extra stamina recovery just helps out a lot with that. Then for the other crystal tier, the Thorny Crack tier is a very nice option as well. We want to take it for exactly the same reason as why we took the Millicent's Prosthesis talisman basically. We have a power stancing setup, so we get those damage bonuses very easily with how quickly we hit our opponents consecutively. Now regarding stats, we have an occult bleed setup, so we can have a really nice and efficient stat distribution. If you're starting a new playthrough and want to min-max your experience, then the best starting class for this build will be the Bandit. It has high levels in Arcane and Dexterity, and that's exactly what we want because Arcane is our primary damaging stat. This is a pure Arcane build, but the whips do need some points into Dexterity and Strength to meet the requirements to be able to wield and fully use the weapons, and the Bandit's starting Dexterity levels helps out very well with that while having high Arcane. Putting 2 points in Dexterity will be enough to meet the requirements of the whips when you also use the Millicent's Prosthesis talisman, which I highly recommend using with this build, and then put 1 point into Strength to meet the Strength requirement. Now for the actual relevant stats of the build, you really just want to get Arcane to level 80 as fast as possible. Arcane is everything with this build as it scales both our damage as well as our blood loss buildup. So get that to level 80 to fully soft cap on both raw damage output as well as our blood loss buildup. Then for a level 125 build, 50 vigor is really nice with this build. It will make us very tanky, especially in combination with the Dragon Crest Great Shield talisman. And then I'd put the rest of the points in endurance so we get more stamina, which is nice with whips because like I said earlier, they do consume a lot of stamina, especially when you use 2 of them at the same time. And it gives us also more equip load to wear gear with higher defensive stats. For a level 150 build, I would fully soft cap on vigor and get it to 60 and then put the last 15 points into endurance, and this will give us a really high endurance level as well, giving us pretty much all the comfort we need for stamina management while in combat. Now I didn't feel like you need to spend any points into mind because the Ashes of Wars that we use, that I will go over in a second, all cost very low FP. So the Bandit's starting mind level is in my opinion more than enough, but feel free to customize it to your own liking. Now finally for the Ashes of Wars, even though you get very limited options with whips, especially if you also infuse them with occult on top, you do have two very nice options that I like. The first one is Bloodhound Step, and this is the one that I recommend to use on your main hand whip, as it gives you a lot of mobility in all fights and a great sense of evasiveness. Basically, with it you can dodge a lot of attacks and set up for your own attacks at the same time, making this Ash of War fit a whips build perfectly because it just synergizes well with the reach that you get when you're attacking with whips. Bloodhound Step did in fact get nerfed recently, but it's still very powerful, and from a gameplay perspective it is actually in a much better position now in my opinion, and you actually have to use your brain and not just spam it when using it, which makes it a lot more fun to play with it now as well, so definitely get it. Now for our offhand whip, I recommend using Beast Roar. Beast Roar does good damage, but more importantly, with this Ash of War, we will now have a long range damaging option in our kit to deal with enemies that are far away from us. And with that, we cover every aspect of combat with this Ash of War in our kit. With everything combined, you will now have a very OP whips build that you can destroy the game with. In addition to the early game whips build that I also showed you, you're completely set for a pure whips only playthrough. Power stancing these Hoslow's Petal whips with this setup will lead to very quick bleed procs, usually just within 1 or 2 jump attacks or a few power stance hits. Depending on the boss you're fighting, you will proc bleed. And at the same time, because we are also fully soft cap in raw damage through arcane, we also just deal a lot of raw physical damage. In other words, you will just smack your opponents to a pulp in your hits when you're not proccing bleed. Now playing with whips really gives you that feeling that you're just smacking or slapping things, and the weapons have a very unique moveset, and I know that whips are one of the more unpopular weapon classes, but that's also why I definitely do recommend you to try out this build if you have never played with whips before, because they are definitely a unique and fun weapon class with a very unique feel to it. They really just might become your favorite weapons in Elden Ring. Now it's time for you to become the Punisher and destroy everything in the game. If you liked the video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, hit the bell thing so you're the first to get notified when I upload something, and let me know your thoughts in the comments.